Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music both new and old. And today, it's Aphex Twin Odds and Ends. So this video is kind of a new segment of mine, where I go down some EPs and side projects of Aphex Twin and go down what I think of them. I won't be going into all of them super in depth, as there are a lot of them, and I don't have a ton to say about them all. And you know, I will warn you, I didn't even particularly like every single one of them either, but I felt like all the ones that I'll talk about here are worth mentioning in some regard. I don't think I even covered all of them either. I just talked about the ones that are already on my iPod, which is most of them, but sorry if there's some obscure EP of his that I missed. Well, let's just get down to it then. So first, let's talk about Windowlicker. Now, there's only 3 tracks on this EP, but surprisingly there's quite a bit to say about it despite its length. The title track is, unsurprisingly, my favorite, like a mini symphony of chopped up and glitchy vocal samples, all fitting together to make a surprisingly catchy song. The other 2 songs are not as good, but they're still definitely interesting. The second track, which the Equation song, I guess, aside from its name, is mainly notable for the fact that a spectrogram of the song shows another Richard D. James creepy smile. As for the song itself, it's got a nice beat at first, then dives into some unbelievably crazy and abstract territory. It's not the kind of track that really hooks you in like the title track does, but I found just its pure weirdness to be its selling point. Finally, Nanu is a track deliberately designed to sound like a music box, with like this cute little melody of little plinking noises, and even some noises of like a wind-up key. You'd think, given RDJ's track record, that he'd turn this track into some kind of creepy and/or like unbelievably crazy tune, but no, that's really all there is to it. It's not creepy in the slightest, it's actually quite pleasant to listen to. But overall, this EP is definitely very interesting and not to be missed. I'm gonna say 8.3 out of 10. Next up, we got Come to Daddy, which is another kind of varied EP, which would, in my opinion, make for a good replacement to the last 4 tracks of the Richard D. James Expanded Edition. The 3 versions of the title track are vastly different, with the Pappy mix being extremely intense and demonic, and surprisingly really fun to listen to. The Little Lord Fauntleroy mix being kinda like To Cure a Weakling Child, with some more singing from a little kid. There's also a pretty cool remix of To Cure a Weakling Child here too, by the way. And the Mummy mix being like a more typical drum and bass, percussion-heavy track. The other tracks are cool too. Flim is a nice, relaxing tune with a happy melody that thankfully isn't subverted to sound creepy, so kinda like Boobadiadian Chord from Drux. This one's probably my favorite track on the EP. Bucephalus Bouncing Ball is apparently part of some kind of IDM tennis with Audible, and as such sounds kinda like something they'd make. Like a really impressive and complex drum and bass track. IZUS is driven by a somewhat melancholy melody complemented by some acoustic sounding, almost jazzy drums. Definitely one of my favorites. The only track that doesn't do much for me is Funny Little Man, which has this kinda creepy melody and some kid making baby noises or something. Would have been out of place on the Richard D. James album, but not actually that fun to listen to. But still, overall, pretty solid EP, would recommend, 7.7 out of 10. Next up is Polygon Window, Surfing on Sine Waves. So, when Warp Records kicked off its Artificial Intelligence series, the 8-album series which more or less birthed the IDM genre, it was only natural that Mr. James himself would contribute an album. Though honestly, I don't remember getting that much into Surfing on Sine Waves back in the day. Listening to it now, it holds up surprisingly well. Lots of old-school 808 drums, subtle and mysterious melodies carried by quiet acid house-ish synth tones straight out of 8592. Some tracks fare better than others. For instance, I didn't really care for the hyper-percussive Quaff, as it feels kind of out of place here. But the more laid-back tracks unsurprisingly appeal more to me, such as the tranquil ambient closer Quinofec, or the quaint and beautiful If It Really Is Me. The more beat-oriented material varies in quality. Like, the title track is lots of fun, and is actually surprisingly catchy given how abstract it is. Audex Powder is pretty similar, though not as catchy, thanks to the kind of atonal section in the middle I'm not head over heels for. Supremacy 2 is pretty similar to Quaff in that it's really percussive, but the ambient pads on top make this a much more effective track in my eyes. Untitled is a little out of place for me thanks to this abrasive lead synth, and UT1 Dot and Quixote, I don't know, are spooky sounding but nevertheless engaging. Overall, this is a pretty fun album and worth checking out. It's more like the beat-oriented cousin to 8592, but there's another album that goes for this exact same aesthetic and, in my opinion, pulls it off much better, and that album is Liqueurs' Incunabula album. Incidentally, that's also part of the Artificial Intelligence series. But still, surfing on sine waves is cool. I think it's worth checking out. 7.5 out of 10. Next up is the Hangable Audible EP from Aphex. I'm not gonna lie, I mostly found this EP to just kind of be a little more forgettable than most of his stuff. There are a couple of interesting moments here and there, like the constantly changing and engaging title track, as well as the more memorable tunes to Custodian Discount or Arched Maid via RDJ. Also the track Every Day has a pretty fun and catchy melody, as well as some kind of funny spoiled little brat child talking over it. Give me another shot. Every day. But the other tracks are just his usual drum and bass material without anything particularly special about them. It's decent enough, but nothing I'd really recommend going out of your way to get. I think solid 7 out of 10 for that one. Next we got Classics. Oh boy. This album is a compilation of his early Didgeridoo and Xylem Tube EPs, as well as a handful of other random early tracks and remixes. And I'm not gonna lie, this collection also doesn't do much for me. In fact, it's the only Aphex Twin release I've heard thus far that was actively difficult for me to get through. The majority of this album is hyper-percussive and repetitive like Quaff, or the parts of I Care Because You Do that I didn't personally care for. There are a couple of good songs on here as well though. I think Didgeridoo is alright. I like the melodies on Polynomial C, and the more down-tempo feel of Analog Bubble Bath. And I guess I like some of the other spookier melodies here and there, and the percussion track on Flaphead that vaguely reminds me of Actium. But other than that, I'm not gonna lie, it's really nothing to write home about. If you enjoy the more percussion-heavy parts of I Care Because You Do, then you'll like this too. But it's just really not for me. I think 6 out of 10. Next up, Donkey Rhubarb EP. And you know, I went into this expecting not to like it given how I reacted to Classics, but actually it's really good. The title track is lots of fun. Vas Deferens is nothing special, just kind of another percussion-heavy romp, but still more engaging than some of the less memorable tracks on Classics. And then there's an awesome orchestral version of Icthedral, courtesy of Philip Glass. And finally a track called Pancake Lizard, which would have fit right at home on the back end of I Care Because You Do alongside tracks like Cowcut is a Twin. Not the best thing I've ever heard, but worth mentioning nonetheless. Just be warned the iTunes version screws up song titles and replaces the title track with the original Icthedral, so go for the original version if you can find it. But still, I think 7.7 out of 10. Next up is Caustic Window. I've heard both the LP and the compilation released under this name, and I can pretty safely say LP is better. While both are mostly focused around I Care Because You Do style percussion-heavy tracks, I think we've established by now how I feel about those. The LP has a handful of more melodic tracks, and big surprise, the melodies here are great. Tracks like Flutie, Squidge in the Fridge, Fingery, Jazz Phase, and 101 Rainbows have really beautiful and interesting melodies, which I can see myself returning to a lot. Again, it's not all great, but it is mostly really good and worth checking out at some point. I think 7.5 out of 10. As for the compilation, basically it's kind of like the LP without the more interesting moments. I think it's kind of skippable. 6.7 out of 10. Next up is the Analord series. So Analord is a series of 11 EPs with 42 tracks in total, and the entire series can be listened to in a day, but be warned, it's not actually good all the way through. While I like all the old acid house synths all over the series, there's a lot of tracks that just kind of have RDJ flexing his drum and bass skills as usual, with really abstract and atonal melodies, and don't really have much to offer outside of that. You could instead go for the abridged version of the series, Chosen Lords. Just 10 tracks, which more or less showcase the best the series has to offer. Now, there are definitely a few tracks that I would have liked to include on this compilation as well. For instance, the 8-minute track Lisbon Acid is just a freaking masterpiece, and it really needed to be included. And I suppose there were a couple of tracks here and there, like the vaguely catchy Stepping Filter 101, or the big and very well fleshed out Font Acid. That would have been cool to see as well. But other than that, the compilation covers more or less what the whole series has to offer. While I don't love every track on there, I do at least think that all the ones that were included were, at the very least, some of the better ones. Crying in Your Face and Phoenix Funk 5 are really good tracks with catchy melodies that made the compilation. My favorite track in the entire series, which also made the compilation, has to be pwsteel.ldpinch.d, which has a really catchy and beautiful melody and a really foot-tapping beat that just keeps me returning to it over and over. Overall, I think I'd recommend checking out the whole series at least once and deciding for yourself whether the compilation does the series justice. And while I personally think it does a fairly decent job of giving like an abridged preview and showing the variety of sounds the series has to offer, there's still a lot of cool acid house sounds on here and some pretty nice deep cuts of the guy that are certainly worth your time. For both the entire series and the compilation, I'd say around average 7.3 out of 10. Next up, Computer Controlled Acoustic Instruments Part 2 EP, which is pretty much exactly what it says on the tin. A lot of songs on this EP remind me of those kind of like impressionist pieces on Drux, which ordinarily I'd be all over, but I don't know, like the majority is really atonal and emotionless and just ends up not leaving much of an impression on me as I'd like. It's got its moments, and it is one of the more interesting side releases, but this was kind of a disappointment overall. I think 6.7 out of 10. And finally, we'll finish this off with Orphaned Deejay Selek 2006-2008. Honestly, I had really low expectations going into this EP, as you can see that Aphex twin side projects tend to be really hit and miss with me, and the fact that he didn't even feel like this was up to a high enough standard to release it under the Aphex twin name, I was prepared for the worst. And while it's certainly not great, and there's really nothing here you couldn't have found on his other projects, especially Analord, it was at least better than I thought it was gonna be. It's got some decent melodies, and the old school Analord-ish feel, while again nothing new, doesn't take away from the experience. And on top of that, I like how a bunch of these tracks flow into each other really well. It's not anything that offers a lot for me to discuss in detail, but you could do a lot worse than this. Pretty serviceable for what it is. I think solid 7 out of 10. So, I guess that's everything. As you can see, our Deejay had his share of mediocre releases that I have little to nothing to say about, but there are also plenty of tracks here and there that really could use some more attention than they currently get. I'm sure if you enjoy the guy's more percussive material, you'll probably enjoy some of these releases more than I did, but personally there's not much use for some of this stuff when we have people like Windowlicker exploring the same territory, but showing much more creativity and memorability. I get the impression that our Deejay was on autopilot on some of these releases. I mean, Aphex Twin is pretty much untouchable in the public eye, even at this point. And I've wondered if some of these releases are really only well-loved because they have his name on it. But hey, it's not like a less than perfect track record takes away from the experiences we get out of really great material like the Selected Ambient Works albums or Drux. And I could probably count on one hand how many bands have 3 or more 9 out of 10 albums to their name. But I just don't think Aphex Twin is a musical god or anything. But, of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it. But I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing. Make sure to bug me about releases that I might have missed, because I either didn't really think they were worth mentioning, or just didn't even realize they existed, or what have you. Also, feel free to call for my beheading for not liking your favorite Aphex Twin side project or something. I don't know. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.